Good evening. All right. I've been wanting to do this video since Sunday. I went to the first service and knew right away that it was something that I could share. And so I went back with my notebook on the second service and took the very best notes I could. I was never really a great note taker. I've always found that I learn best just by sitting and looking and watching, and sometimes taking notes will kind of put me behind in the thought. But I was thinking that since I already heard this message once, that I could do it again, that I could listen again and take better notes, since I'd already heard it and I knew where he was going and I knew kind of how I would structure my notes. So I was at Harvest Christian Fellowship in Amarillo last Sunday, and Curtis, I forgot his last name, was the pastor there, and he did the preaching Sunday. And I don't remember what the title was, but basically it was part of his Divine Embrace series, and it was talking about us understanding what God's already done. And he started in Isaiah 6 in the throne room experience, and he pointed out that Isaiah had done nothing. That the only thing Isaiah did in the throne room experience in Isaiah 6 was admit his sin, and to initiate things. So God brought the cleansing and atoning when they brought the coal and touched his lips. God was the one who brought Isaiah into his presence, and our job is just to know and make God known. And so some do that by preaching the judgment of God. They preach a very angry God that is extremely just towards us. In other words, they do a poor job of talking about grace and rest. And if you follow that kind of angry God preaching too much, if you get that out of balance, then people begin to think they're going to earn their way to heaven by being good, and you can't do that. I'm sorry. You can't get to heaven just by being a good person. There are going to be a lot of good people in hell because they thought they could earn it. And really what we need to do is trust on God for his grace and his mercy through Jesus Christ. And I'm not saying that we should continue to sin. I'm just saying that before you can do anything, we have to learn about grace and mercy, because it is God who chooses us. It is God who invites us. It is God who initiates a relationship with us. It is God who created us. So anyway, so God is a God of love and grace. He read a small excerpt out of the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. And it was the scene where the kids are older, and Lucy comes back and she's looking for Ashlyn, and she comes and she lays down by him and looks up at him, and she says, every year you grow. She says, "Oh, Ashlyn, you've grown bigger." He also turned white, but he also grew bigger. And Lucy says, "You've grown bigger," and he's like, "Every year you grow, you'll find me bigger." Now, it's not real hard to see the analogy there. That every year you grow in the Lord God, if your relationship is right with him, he'll grow bigger to you. Because as you test your faith through obedience to God, you'll rely more on God and you'll need God more. And so every year that you're with God, he should grow bigger to you. So anyway, he talked a little bit about us being pulled away from our plan and being remembered. In other words, put back or grafted back, like it talks about, I believe it's in Romans, where he talks about grafting us back, grafting the wild olive branch into the olive tree. We are that wild olive branch, and we are grafted back by the Creator into the kingdom, not through Judaism and works and sacrifice, but through Jesus Christ and his work and his sacrifice. So he talked about the staff meeting as they talked about the message. Apparently they get together and they talk about the message every week, and he likes to get their input on it. And the girl Rachel said that we're like the red wheat. they'd grow red wheat out here, and red wheat, they plant it like they're planting it right now. As a matter of fact, I think they'll be planting it as soon as the cotton dries and defoliates. And so anyway, the red wheat it looks dead during the winter. It looks as though there is nothing going to grow there. But it's just dormant. It is not dead. And so what we always need to remember is that when things look the worst, when they look the most hopeless, that God is still at work. That dormancy gives the plant a chance to really build some roots and to be able to winter the storm. It's it doesn't grow during the winter whenever it is going to have trouble keeping that foliage because of the freezing temperatures anyway. It lays dormant and it waits to sprout in the spring when the conditions are right. So God is always at work with us. That we need, one of the other statements he made was we need to rest and remember who God is. That when we have those seasons of dormancy, we need to rest. It's a sign to rest. If you find yourself you were used to being busy in the ministry, used to being busy in the church, and you find yourself in a place or a season where you feel like you're not being used, well, you need to take advantage of that and rest and remember who God is. Rest and spend time with God, commune with God. He talked about how a lot of new believers, they're so gung-ho. They're like, man, I'm ready to storm hell with a water pistol. And he talked about, his thought was always like, well, I wonder if they have any water in that pistol. So anyway, he mentioned Watchman Nee, one of my favorite authors. I love Watchman Nee. He actually mentioned one of the books, but he didn't quote it. Spiritual Authority. I forgot what book he was talking about, but he talked about Watchman Nee's. He spent a lot of time on Watchman Nee's salvation story, and he mentioned Ephesians 1 through 14. He said at one point he was just sitting. He learned to just sit and to meditate, which is a big part of that culture anyway. And in that sitting, in his conversion story, he felt the power of God and the rest. And he sat and experienced God's divine embrace. And then he walked, then he stood and walked in what God had called him to do. And he also mentioned keeping things in order with God. Not that we work for God, but God works for us. And I know from some people that sounds so egocentric, but it's really not when you consider who God is and who we are. We start in his rest. God works. The other thing that we need to remember is that God works for us by his own will. We don't order God, but God, it was his own will that he works for us. It's his own will that he works in our benefit. We start in rest. Our part is to hope and believe. He defines grace. Pastor Curtis said at their church they replace grace a lot of times with the phrase his ability, God's ability, and I believe that is true. I think grace is not just unmerited favor, but also that it's God's ability, because Paul even describes sometimes that by grace we are able to fulfill the ministry. So anyway, it's by God's will that we're made that he made Paul an apostle. It was by God's will that he blessed us, because he chose us to be holy and to be loved. And we were, if you're a Christian, you were adopted through Christ, freely given, a gift that was freely given. God lavishly gives us continually. God lavishly gives his love to us continually. To lavish is an overflowing. It's not an ending thing. It is not a one-time thing. To lavish is to continually overflow grace and ability to us, and mercy to us. It's an ongoing thing. My own personal note, I threw a little note in there that we need to, and part of that rest is studying the Word. And the devil always works to steal, kill, and destroy. He steals the Word from us, kills our relationship with God, and then he can destroy your life with unbelief, or destroy your belief. Ephesians 2, his great love for us. By his great love for us, he made us alive by grace, seated by his grace and ability. and it's a finished work. The misrepresented God is an angry God. Our God is not angry. He's not resentful. He's not hiding himself. Man, if you seek God, you will find him. There are a lot of false religions that have led people astray because they sought God through a false religion, and they didn't find him, and so now they believe there isn't a God. Let me tell you, if you're truly seeking God, you will find him. He did not, God did not save us to make us producers. We don't, I'm not saying we don't work for the kingdom, but it's not a work as in an employer-employee relationship. It is a work that is a father-son, family business, friends in partnership. It's we're not producers, but we're participants in God's kingdom. I thought he did a really good job on that, by the way. I don't remember this note real well, but it's sit, rest, and he becomes bigger. When you're forced to rest, our God, the God, will become bigger in your life. The world is a noisy place. People want more money and more things. What we really need to do is learn our position. Don't trade your rest for one unholy smear. I liked that. See God for who he is. Make God known. The ministry becomes an overflow of a life resting in God. Then he talked about the creation story, and in the creation story, God made everything. He made the heavens and the earth, the birds, the plants, the land, the sea, he made everything, and then he stopped and he made us on the sixth day. And on that sixth day, he made us differently. He spoke everything else into existence, and he literally got down in the dirt and made us with his own hands. He breathed his own life, his own spirit into us. Everything else in creation works by design, without a free will to bring God glory. But us, he made us very differently and very personally. So our first day was the seventh. Our first full day was the seventh day, and what was that? The day of rest. So our first full day was the day of rest. He sums it up that we should learn to rest in him. His conclusion was Jesus was the head, and we are the body, and that we are when we remember who God is, we are remembered into the kingdom. In other words, separate parts brought back into the kingdom. When we learn about God and we learn who God is, it remembers us back into the kingdom. In other words, it puts us back together, not like member as in body members, puts us back together and puts us in the right perspective. God is not looking to punish, but he has already done the work of grace. Thought it was a great message. Couldn't possibly have done as well as he did in 13 minutes and 32 seconds. But there's definitely some things in there. If you'll go back to the scriptures, I'll call them all out to you again. He started in Isaiah 6. He mentioned, he mentioned Acts 1:4-5. He also mentioned Watchman Nee. Let's see, Ephesians chapter 2, God's great love for us. And then he went back to Genesis, the creation story, and summed it up from there. I thought he did a great job. I thought it was a great church. By the way, if you're in Amarillo, you are not without a good church. Harvest Christian Fellowship is a great church. Men, if you are looking for a church that is good for men, I met many healthy Christian men there. I went to a men's meeting on a weekday morning at 6 o'clock. Yeah, 6 o'clock. And man, I was shocked to see how many people had gotten up early to make God a priority in their life. got many blessings there. If you are a youth in Amarillo and you're looking for a church, man, they have a very good youth pastor, a good godly man who seeks God, who covers his kids in prayer, and is excited about what God's doing and is excited about making disciples. So anyway, that was my Sunday at Harvest Christian Fellowship. It's a good sermon. I hope you go back and revisit the scriptures I mentioned and think about what is your relationship with God? Are you working as an employee right now? Because it's not His will. His will is to give you rest and to give you the ability to partner with Him. So don't partner as an employee. Don't partner as anything other than a son or daughter working with their dad. And we all know when we go to work with our dad, he's happy to have us there, and He really does all the hard work. All we have to do is obey Him. Have a good night.